At 12:40, the plane taxied into the night, heading toward runway 17, where it paused for an instrument and equipment check. Roger Peterson was contacted by the airport tower for his flight plan. In his last known words, Peterson said he'd give his flight plan when he was airborne.
The normal procedure back then was to take off, and after you take off, you activate your flight plan. Today on instruments, your flight plan is activated when you get given your clearance. In this case, you used to take off, and then you'd call the tower or call the facility that you were talking to and activate the flight plan. He didn't do that.
As Jerry Dwyer watched his plane take off, he climbed up to the airport control tower and attempted to contact Peterson by radio. He had his eyes fixed on the tiny white taillights, which seemed to be gradually drifting downward.
I said to the man in the tower with me, who was a weatherman, that the airplane is going down. And he said, no, that's an optical illusion. But I'd been flying since I was 13, and I'd watched a lot of airplanes, and I thought it was going down, and I hoped I was wrong. I went home, and I called the tower at Fargo, North Dakota, and I called them a number of times over a period of the morning. And finally, the guy in the tower said, no Bonanza has landed here, and no Bonanza is going to land here because we are now having a blizzard that they couldn't see 10 feet. We knew we had a problem.
Because no one survived the accident, no one will ever know what went on board the Bonanza in the early hours of February 3rd, 1959. But what is certain is that the plane crashed within 4 minutes of takeoff in a cornfield only 5 miles from the airfield. Witnesses living adjacent to the crash site allegedly report hearing a plane in trouble and seeing low-flying aircraft lights at approximately 1 a.m. What is known for sure is that the Beechcraft Bonanza N3794M was torn apart like tissue paper as it hurtled to Earth at over 160 miles per hour.
The next morning, Mr. Dwyer called about 7:15, and he says, Carroll, he said, my plane never checked in at the first checkpoint, the Alexander, Minnesota. And he said, I'm going up, and as soon as I find out anything, I'll be back in touch with you.
I decided I was going to go fly the same flight, or try to fly, see if I can find the wreckage, if there was a wreckage, if there was an accident, if they were out there. And I was looking for anything that looked like a wrecked airplane, and I started seeing something ahead of me that I thought was the airplane. I said, there it is, and he said, no. He said that's a hog house. And I said, no, that's the wrecked airplane. So we started a descent right here, and just on this same path, aiming right for where the aircraft came to rest. And I pulled over here and took a look, and I can see a spot right there where I circled around, and there was the wreckage. And I circled, and I was sure it was the wrecked airplane. And I called the sheriff's office.
My name's Jerry Allen, and I was the sheriff of Saragordo County at the time of this crash. The aircraft was up against this fence line, and there are 3 bodies outside of the plane. Richard Valenzuela, Richie Valens, was approximately 15 feet this side of the wreckage. To the left of the wreckage was a person identified as Buddy Holly. About 40 feet beyond the fence line was the body of Giles Richardson, or the Big Bopper.
Sheriff had it all fenced off already, so nobody could go down in there. And I asked him if he cared if I went in. He said, no. He said, I don't want you to go in there unless you can stand a gruesome sight. The only thing the Big Bopper had on for clothes was his shorts. Took everything off, shoes, socks, coat. I don't know how it did that.
I don't understand. I've investigated many accidents, automobiles and otherwise, how 3 of these bodies got loose from the airplane and landed outside. And the bopper was apparently riding in the back seat, was the largest of these people. He's a big man. Went over the fence as far as he did. Yet the pilot stayed inside the airplane.
We knew there was another body there. We knew that we could find a pilot. And I said, there's nowhere he could be here unless he's wrapped up in that plane somewhere. And I crawled up on top and looked down in there, and I seen the sole of a shoe rolled with cable rolled all around it tight.
There wouldn't have been any possibility of any survival, and most certainly with the pilot.
Had it been reduced to just a ball of cable, and the motor and the body, it was shortened, and I don't know where the landing gear went to. Only the tail was spread open on the top of it. It was a pretty gruesome picture. Richie Valens lost half of his head.
Hale, I'm going to break in here with some unbelievably sad news. Mr. Carol Anderson, the manager of the Surf Ballroom, just called me a few moments ago. Carol Anderson just told me that Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, and the Big Bopper are dead. They were in the plane that was to fly them to Fargo, North Dakota for tonight's performance of the Winter Dance Party, and they left right after our show last night at the Surf Ballroom. This is unbelievably sad news and very unreal. On the way home, I headed out toward the crash site. The plane was still there. The ambulance was still there. They had not taken the bodies away yet. And I could not get out of the car. You were torn. You wanted to go there, and I didn't. Carol Anderson had said on the phone it was a bad crash, and they were pretty badly torn up. I didn't want to see that. I've yet to go to the crash site. 40 years later, I've not been out there.
There were a lot of people at the scene. The officers kept the public away until the coroner got here. I brought the coroner out. It was Dr. Ralph Smiley. He examined the location. We took photographs of the scene, and then he released the bodies to the funeral home in Clear Lake. The one body of the pilot was taken to Mason City to the Mercy Hospital, where they did an autopsy, which is required under federal regulations.
After the bodies had been removed, the Civil Aviation Board stepped in, and investigators spent 3 days sifting through wreckage. They laid the blame firmly on pilot Roger Peterson, referring to his history of poor instrument reading, lack of concentration, overconfidence, a hearing disability, and lack of experience in ignoring the bad weather warnings. As Jerry Dwyer was making his grim discovery, the rest of the band were asleep on the freezing tour bus, headed for the next venue, completely unaware of the tragedy.
Well, we pulled into Moorhead, Minnesota, and when the bus stopped, I woke up, and Tom Yalsop was sitting across from me. And the tour manager came and said, "Waylon, come here, I've got to talk to you." And I don't know why or how or anything, but I knew something bad was wrong, and I said, "No." I said, "You go, Tommy."
And me and Geller walked in the hotel, and there was a TV over in the lobby, and it had the Big Bopper's picture on. I remember that, and I thought they were plugging the show. And I told the desk clerk, I said, "Give me a room next to Buddy Holly's." He said, "Haven't you heard?" He said, "Them guys got killed in a plane crash." And I said, "What?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "They were all killed in a plane crash down in Iowa."
Still laid up in a hospital with frostbite, Carl Bunch heard the awful news by telephone.
They came in with a wheelchair and said I had a phone call. Well, they put me in the wheelchair and rolled me down the hall to the payphone, and it was my mother. And she asked me, she said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Thaw out and join the crew, you know." She says, "No, you don't understand. Buddy and Richie and the Bopper were all killed last night in a plane crash. What are you going to do? And I couldn't think of anything to do but cry. It was so hard to believe that those guys were dead.
And I walked around for a half a day. And then I thought maybe I would call home. And sure enough, when I called home, everybody back in Lubbock and back in my hometown, it started that morning about 8 or 9 o'clock, you know, when they found everything and said that Buddy Holly and his band. So my mother and all my brothers and everything thought I had died, you know, on the plane.
Because Buddy had my wallet in his pocket. Yeah, the news went out, they found 5 IDs and, well, they found 4 bodies. And the lady next door had just heard on the radio where I'd been in the plane crash, you know. And she was calling my mom, telling her. But the line was busy and it was me telling her. So when she finally got through, my mother told her that. And I said, no, he's all right, I just talked to him. He wasn't on the plane, so.